A group went on a trip to the squirrel farm. In the middle of it, the grandmother called, saying her son had gotten drunk and lost control, terrorizing the house. They rushed back and found him, wildly jumping around with an axe. The scene was a complete mess, so they called in 3 detectives, plus the district officer, just to subdue him. They tried to cuff him, but things quickly went sideways. The investigator, despite wearing body armor, got slashed on his exposed side and dropped, holding his wound. The rest of the team freaked out. He hit one of their own with an axe. It was chaos. They started beating him, trying to restrain him, when suddenly, the local officer collapsed too. It wasn't the axe anymore. The guy was already cuffed. The officer turned around and saw the grandmother standing behind them, stabbing their sides with a knife. She could not bear to see them hurting her son. They restrained her too, but by then, the rest of the team had heard the commotion and come running to help. So yeah, that's the kind of messed up thing that went down. I know it's not exactly scary, but it's what I've got to share. Wow, you brought back a memory. About 5 years ago, I served in the State People's Republic. We got a call about a guy in a hut. Apparently, he had gone crazy, caught his sister out in the middle of nowhere with an axe and hit her right between the eyes. She managed to escape the house in a panic. So, we head over there. The area was not great, kind of like Burden, but not quite. It was violent and unpredictable. You never knew what to expect. We get to the building, but to reach his door, we have to go around the elevator shaft and pass by 3 other apartments. At the door, the guy yells something like, "Open up? Screw you. I will pack you up and throw you out." He was serious too. Now, we weren't looking for any heroics. My partner, Zorik, and I decided to jam the signal, let him panic for a bit. We went down to the car, suited up in heavy gear, helmets and such. Then we realized we'd forgotten the damn battering ram. Back to the car again. Zorik then says, "I left my rifle in the car. I'm sweating in my armor, saying great, let's run a marathon in this heat." Meanwhile, half the building is watching this like a Belmondo action movie. We finally decide to just bust in and figure it out. We head back to the floor, but something is off. The doors to the apartment look completely different. The fig tree on the landing has sprouted ears, and I'm sure it was not like that before. I tell Zorik, something is wrong here. What floor did we go to? He says the 10th. I pressed it myself, and I know I pressed 10 too, but everything looked weird. The architecture was different, more modern, even though it was an old place before. Now it looked like some Renaissance building. We checked the apartment number and realized, shit, we needed the 16th floor, not the 10th. We went up to the 16th, and there it was, exactly how it looked before, fig plant and all. We broke in without much trouble. Turns out, the guy was sitting next to his sister's body, holding a Saga shotgun and a loaf of sausage for some reason, who knows why. Anyway, we neutralized him with a solid taser shot and a well-aimed blow to the head with a stool. Because, let's be honest, we'll see tasers in our office about the same time humanity starts spending weekends in space. The moral of the story? After the shift, Zorik and I had a few drinks, and I asked, what the hell happened? We both pressed for the 10th floor twice, talked to that psycho through the door, but somehow ended up on the 16th. We never figured out the answer to that. In the end, we just shrugged it off. So yeah, that's the story. Sorry for the length in the content, but as they say, you can't rewrite the truth. I used to know a cop back in the mid-2000s. He often asked me to be a witness, so I ended up seeing some pretty strange things. One time, in 2006, a call came in from the private sector. An old lady had been hearing a woman moaning from Uncle Petch's house. He disappeared about 5 years ago. I showed up with the cops, and we brought the old woman along as an attesting witness. We approached the house. It looked abandoned, completely overgrown with weeds and nettles taller than me. The gate barely opened. The path was so overgrown that it was clear that no one had entered in a long time. The cops were skeptical, thinking the old lady had misheard, but she insisted she had been hearing the moans for 2 days while working in her garden. They scolded her for not calling sooner, but she swore no one had gone in or out of the house. The house itself was just as overgrown, and the doors sunk into the ground. The cops circled the house, but found no signs of forced entry. We checked the windows, but they were filthy and covered by curtains. Still, one of the cops noticed through a gap in the curtains that someone was lying on the table inside. It looked like a woman, but the view was unclear. They tried to open the door, but had to break the window instead. The old lady could not climb in, so she stayed outside, mumbling while the cops and I entered the house. We first came into the kitchen, which looked like a typical Soviet-style kitchen, covered in dust and unused for ages. Newspapers lay scattered on the floor. But in the next room, things got strange. The room appeared to be a living room, with a sofa, an old tube TV, and a sideboard. In the center was a table, draped in a spotless white tablecloth, and on the table lay a half-naked woman. She looked like one of today's TikTokers, covered in tattoos, wearing a lace bra, but this was 2006, so she was probably more of an emo or goth type. I was familiar with most of the alternative scene in our city, but I did not recognize her. One of her legs was bent at the knee, but as we approached, we realized she was dead. Then we noticed something even stranger. She was not wearing any underwear, and there was a large, orange object sticking out of her. It was not hollow, but solid, and covered in a texture like sandpaper. Inside, it contained a lead rod, which seemed to be for weight. A small hose was attached to the object, running along her leg, down to the floor, and disappearing between the floorboards. Despite the object, there was hardly any blood on the table, just a small puddle and a few drops. One of the cops stomped on the floor and said it felt hollow, like there might be a basement. We found a hatch in the corner near the sideboard and opened it. There was a wooden staircase leading down. One of the cops ran to the car to get a flashlight, and we descended into the basement. It was empty, except for some shelves with jars, farm tools, and a broken window. The hose from upstairs dangled from the ceiling, and beneath it was a circular imprint as if something had been placed there. Back upstairs, the cops searched the living room and found the woman's shoes behind the sofa. One shoe held her pants, and the other a gold bracelet. No other belongings were found. We checked the second room, likely a bedroom, but it was untouched. As for the investigation, the woman had died about 7 hours before we arrived. She was around 23 to 25 years old, not from the area, and no one ever came forward to claim they were her family. She was buried as an unknown. There were no drugs in her system, and she was otherwise healthy. She died from shock, likely due to the pain caused by that object. It was later described to me by the cop as a ripper and a dilator at the same time. The object had been used in a back and forth motion, simulating sex. The house's owner was eventually found. He had moved away to care for his sick sister and suffered a stroke. He'd been half paralyzed for 3 years and had not been back. He did not recognize the woman in the photo we showed him. There were still many unanswered questions. There were no signs of restraints on the woman's body, and no indications she had struggled. Where were her other clothes? The entire property was searched, even the outhouse, but nothing else was found. The basement window was small enough that only a thin person or a child could fit through it. The woman herself might have been able to, but why would she? And if she had done all this to herself, why drain her own blood? 2 fingerprints were found on the object, but they did not match hers. If she was not local, why would she come to a stranger's house to die in such a bizarre way? 5 years later, a drunk man at a train station was arrested for attacking a cop. It turned out he had been previously imprisoned for the murder of his wife in a ritualistic manner. When questioned, he eventually confessed to the woman's death. Witnesses placed him in the city at the time, but how they got him to confess is anyone's guess. Back in my first year working with the cops, we did not have a lot of people, so we got paired up with the State Security Service for joint patrols around the city. One day, we got a call to the duty desk. A neighbor said an old woman had not been seen for 3 days. Her house was locked from the inside, but her TV was still on. So, we head over to check it out, but we are basically blind, not knowing what to expect. By the time we get there, the neighbors had already decided to break down the door. As soon as we walked in, we were hit with this sickly sweet stench. It was clear that the old lady had passed away. The neighbors were wailing about how kind she was, asking where she could have gone so suddenly, saying all sorts of nonsense. Two of the old ladies acted like they were about to faint, asking for water and everyone's attention. I was young and on my first corpse call, so I had no idea what to do. My partner told me to call the duty desk and that I should arrange for an ambulance to come pick up the body. So I'm standing there, back to the room where the body is, dialing the number, when out of nowhere, I hear this loud scream behind me, and something grabs my leg. I lost it. The neighbors screamed and scattered. The old ladies practically fainted for real, legs in the air. My partner crossed himself so fast that I thought his hand might catch fire. I'm standing there, thinking I need to grab my gun, or else I'm going to get taken out by some kind of undead creature. Turns out, the old woman had been alive the whole time, paralyzed for 3 days, lying there, unable to get up. She was conscious, but could not move, and her body had started to rot from bed sores. That is where the smell came from. After all the chaos, we got everything sorted out, but it was a wild scene. We definitely needed a drink after that one. It worked out, but it was one hell of an experience. The adrenaline and rage from today's events have left me shaking as I write this. I feel chaotic and a bit off, so bear with me. I had an interview scheduled at one of Shirashka's offices in a suburban industrial building, a grim place filled with unsavory characters. I brought a knife and a blunt object for safety. I arrived an hour early, expecting a simple adventure, finding the office among the Soviet-era buildings. Instead, I encountered something far more intense. I passed through the main checkpoint and asked the guard where to find Horns and Hooves, LLC. He shrugged and pointed to a 5-story building in the distance. I dashed over in about 30 seconds, eager to escape the heat. The area is not very deep. The workshops stretch along a river. Upon entering the building, I was met by an elderly guard and asked her the same question. She directed me to the 4th floor via the staircase, furthest from the entrance, then down the nearest stairs to the 2nd floor. The odd route did not surprise me. These old buildings are always a maze. I navigated through a long, poorly lit corridor lined with offices. After climbing 2 flights of stairs, I realized the 3rd floor was the last. I must have taken a wrong turn somewhere. I checked the 1st and 2nd floors, but they were both locked. When I reached the 3rd floor, it was open. A dirty, shabby corridor awaited. Frustrated, I decided to walk to the end and look for another staircase, but there wasn't one. I pulled out my smartphone to look up the checkpoint's number, only to find it was dead and stuck in a boot loop. Panic surged. I raced back to the 1st floor, kicked down a door, and found myself in the same filthy corridor. I tried to open various doors, but most were stuck. Finally, I found one that yielded to my push. Inside was a room filled with dilapidated furniture and rotting filing cabinets. The heat was so unbearable, so I opened a window and contemplated jumping out, cursing the old guard who sent me up here. When I stepped outside, I was greeted by a 3-story building, some windows boarded up, and it looked abandoned. I muttered to myself, what kind of architecture is this? As I circled the building, searching for the 5-story structure, the reality hit me. There was no trace of it, just a row of workshops. The industrial area appeared much older and more decrepit than when I arrived. I could hear machinery running, even though my original destination was newly abandoned. At this point, my patience evaporated, and I prepared myself for confrontation, armed and ready to react. I sprinted toward the sounds of machinery, reaching a massive, humming substation. There were no people or workshops in sight. I decided to climb onto the roof of the nearest building, feeling like a stalker as I grabbed a rebar for extra protection. As I entered the 3-story building again, a man around 40 approached me with an unsettling gait. Losing my grip on sanity, I pulled the trigger on my weapon and waved the rebar, shouting, "Where is the portal? I need to get back." He panicked and bolted into a room, moving in an unnatural way. I followed, kicking the door down, ready to confront whatever madness awaited. Instead of the room I expected, I found myself back in the same corridor, holding a rotting piece of iron instead of the rebar. Cursing, I exited, only to find a young man at the checkpoint, staring at me like I was insane. I asked him, "Where is the office of Horns and Hooves LLC, dear demonic gatekeeper?" He seemed just as lost and afraid as I was. After I explained my situation, he revealed that the staircase I sought had not existed for 30 years and had been blocked due to a collapse. He mentioned hearing strange footsteps from the area, noting that many offices were empty and the tenants were shady. Frustrated, I pulled out my working phone, called an Uber, and headed home. Now, here are some strange takeaways from today. 1. The weapon was unloaded. The cartridges were all in the magazine. 2. What felt like a 30 to 40 minute ordeal turned out to be nearly 9 hours. I arrived at 11 a.m. and left at 8 p.m. From the moment I stepped into that corridor, I felt a deep sense of unease. I can't shake the feeling that the old guard sent me on a route that was relevant 30 years ago, now possibly leading to a drug lab or chemical site. Did I breathe in something toxic and pass out, only to wake up in that utility room? The options now seem clear. 1. Return with friends, preferably equipped with gas masks. 2. Contact the employer to clarify my bizarre experience before they hear about my erratic behavior. One of my friends works in the criminal investigation department, focusing on finding missing people, what he calls lost individuals. He shared insights about the harsh realities of police work. In Russia, around 200,000 missing persons reports are filed each year, even in peacetime. About 100,000 of these cases are resolved, meaning the individuals are located, either alive or deceased, identified by relatives or by the missing persons themselves. This leaves a troubling question. Where do the remaining 100,000 go? My friend emphasized that he would only discuss cases involving official complaints filed by relatives or colleagues. I looked up statistics online and found varying numbers. However, he insists all published statistics are false, unreliable, and serve only to satisfy bureaucratic needs. The main categories of missing individuals who are not found include 1. Those who disappear suddenly, without explanation. People who go hunting, fishing, or hiking. Individuals who have a fight with their partner and leave home. Those who leave due to issues like alcoholism, mental illness, or drug addiction, often ending up as unidentified bodies in crematoriums. Runaway children from orphanages. Individuals who disappear under suspicious circumstances, such as deaths or ties to criminal groups. People who vanish during military conflicts or natural disasters. The homeless. Approximately half of the missing persons fall into the first category, those who suddenly vanish without a trace. That means around 50,000 people each year disappear for reasons that remain a mystery. Let's explore some of these cases. One morning, a woman who was a mother of 2 dropped one child off at kindergarten and the other at school before boarding a minibus. She never arrived at work, which was only a minute's walk, about 100 meters away from the bus stop. It was as if she had vanished. Her husband and her family searched everywhere, combing through her phone records and scoured their apartment, yet they found nothing at all. The minibus passengers recalled seeing her get off at the correct stop. She worked as a minor official in the district administration. In another case, a man who seemed to have it all, a wife, a child, a good job, left for work one morning in his Ford Mondeo and never arrived. Days later, his car was discovered parked on the side of the road with no signs of struggle or robbery. The keys were still in the ignition, and his laptop and phone were inside, charging. Despite extensive searches of the area with police dogs, there were no leads. He was just an average manager, not the owner of a business with no debts except for a car loan. His wife, a doctor, reported no unusual activity on their accounts. Then there's the chilling story of a young mother who went to buy cottage cheese and milk with her baby under a year old She usually made quick trips while the child napped. This time, she left and never returned. Despite extensive searches lasting over a year, there were no clues at all. In a more perplexing case, two families on vacation stopped at a roadside hotel. After a night's rest, one man was missing. His wife and kids had been sleeping soundly, unaware. The hotel staff did not see anything unusual, and the door was not locked. Surveillance cameras only monitored the parking lot, and the man's belongings were left behind. It is assumed he went outside for a smoke, but no cigarettes were found. Another case involved a programmer who disappeared during his lunch break. Living with a girlfriend and juggling a car loan, he left for lunch and never returned. His dishes were dirty when she came home, indicating he had been there. His phone went silent an hour after he left work. Perhaps the most startling case is that of a police captain who vanished. He boarded a train for work one morning, but never arrived. Everyone involved was questioned, yet it was as if he had simply disappeared into thin air. These stories are just a glimpse into the thousands of similar cases across the country. Where do these missing individuals go? Here are some theories based on past cases where people were eventually found, alive or dead. 1. Murders. Bodies disposed of in various ways. 2. Kidnapping for forced labor. 3. Organ trafficking. 4. Forced prostitution. 5. Accidental deaths due to unforeseen circumstances. An experienced officer who joined the force in the mid-90s shared that the statistics have remained consistent over the years. He travels for work and finds that the numbers are similar everywhere. He even jokingly expressed a belief in alien abductions, given how inexplicably people vanish without a trace. Each year, around 50,000 individuals, men, women, children, and the elderly, disappear. While this figure may seem small compared to the annual population decline of 1 million in the country, these are real people, relatives and friends left in anguish, searching for answers. First story. My mother works in the police, and since I did not play outside much as a child due to the rough environment, I absorbed her incredible stories from the field. I don't recall every detail, but a few stories have stuck with me. One involved two young thugs, aged 13 to 14, who mercilessly targeted a weaker individual, aged 10, facing no resistance. They lured him to a basement or an abandoned location and began to beat him with whatever they could find, showing no signs of compassion. They even struck him on the head, disregarding his pleas to stop. The victim ended up with a fractured skull, bad enough to leave him alive, but unable to move or speak. What did these two geniuses do next? They left him in that state, returning later with a teaspoon. One of the thugs decided to feed the dying man, but lacking supplies, and given their twisted minds, they opted to feed him his own brains. With the spoon, the thug scooped out part of the victim's cerebral cortex and forced it into his mouth. I honestly can't say whether the man was alive or dead at that moment, but his mother later claimed that he had indeed swallowed the grisly substance. I can only wonder what happened to those two and the corpse afterward. Surely he could not have survived. Second story. In another tale, there was an ordinary man named Vasyan who loved to drink. He worked at a slaughterhouse, a job that did not require much intelligence, just a sharp knife to make a cut from ear to ear on a pig. One day, Vasyan showed up to work drunk, or not at all, leading to his inevitable dismissal. He argued, but ultimately lost his job. In a fit of anger, he took a piece of equipment as a memento and wandered off, most likely to the nearest liquor store. After drinking heavily, he headed home. The most sensible choice would have been to take the tram. He got on, still inebriated, and continued drinking. Understandably, the other passengers were uncomfortable, and one woman, Natasha, approached him, scolding him for his behavior, especially with children present. She decided to leave the carriage to avoid further confrontation, but Vasyan followed her. At the bus stop, he called out to her, and, wanting to impress, demonstrated his skills by drawing a line in her, this time with a knife. Worked as a mall cop for a winter. Bazillion little entrances and exits to secure. Place is creepy as hell when empty. Abandoned stores from the 1970s and 1980s walled off. Customers have no idea that they exist. Still can access them through service tunnels. One in particular creeped me the hell out. Closed Chuck E. Cheese kind of restaurant. Remaining lights inside are on 24/7. Still a ton of crap from the 1990s in there. Broken animatronic animals leaned against walls and in closets. Costumes from mall Halloween and Christmas events stored there as well. Forest of artificial Christmas trees. Outdated mannequins. Shoulder-high piles of Christmas lights. Always really hate going in there. Nobody ever talked about it, but if called to go in there, we would never go alone. Lock up connecting service tunnel early each time. Occasionally hear dragging noises from the other side of the wall. Ignore. Nope. Get sent by mall office to grab a reindeer thingy. 2 maintenance with dolly. Me and one other mall cop. Unlock service tunnel entrance. Pry open sticky door. Pops open. One of the animatronics is right up against the door. Nearly shit ourselves. One guy stands out in the hallway, while I and the others go in. Reindeer thing is not where it's supposed to be. Searching all over this creepy indoor forest, full of empty costumes, Christmas lights, and mannequins. Flashlight goes dead. Clumped together with maintenance guy with remaining flashlight. Find reindeer on prep table in old kitchen. Haul it out. Leave the restaurant ASAP. Can't lock the door fast enough. Last weekend at the mall. Locking up. Lights flicker once. Hear a split second of what sounded like muffled children's laughter. Sound was coming from across the wall. Fucking sprint out of that entire wing of the mall. 3 years later, and the knowledge that the lights are on in that room as we speak still gnaws at me. I grew up on a good-sized farm in rural NC. Had like 40 acres of land, mostly forest and a couple big fields. The surrounding properties were pretty much the same, so basically just miles and miles of woods and fields in all directions. The area I was in was well known for being Native American territory. There was even a small Native American museum nearby. Not uncommon to find arrowheads and other artifacts. So I lived here for most of my childhood, age 4 to like 16. I'm 26 now. I always felt like I was being watched. In my house, I could not walk from room to room. I always ran full speed and looking behind me because I felt like I was being followed. Had a number of odd events go down while I lived there. I would regularly see random people walking into and out of the woods, which again was miles and miles of nothing. I'd explored all of our property and a bit of the surrounding area, so I don't know where these random people were going to or coming from. It was pretty bizarre. So, here is one story. Note that in this story, I was not aware of all the Native American stuff and knew nothing of poltergeists. Note, I also have a near photographic memory, which is why I remember random obscure details. Be me, age 10 or so. Had several quads and rode them pretty much daily. Would often ride around with my pellet gun, shooting at random stuff for fun and exploring. This was before everyone had cell phones, by the way. We hit a small deer plot at the bottom of the steep hill and a shooting lane leading to it. I regularly would park at the top of this hill and watch the wildlife occasionally shooting at birds or whatever, but rarely hit anything. There was a big half-buried rock I'd park my quad on to keep from rolling down the hill. Be doing the above activity one afternoon, broad daylight. Parked on the rock, watching the birds, rabbits, squirrels through the scope on my pellet gun. Shit was cash. Suddenly, everything goes dead silent. Like the kind of silent where all you hear is the blood pumping through your ears. Feel every single hair on my body stand on end. What the hell? This has never happened before. The animals I'd been watching were frozen. Suddenly hear slow heavy breathing coming from right behind me and what sounds like a momentary, deep, quiet growl. Freeze. Literally felt electricity in the air, like when you go down those plastic slides at McDonald's. Overcome with pure dread, and felt tears welling up. Slowly turn around, expecting to see a mountain lion or something, thinking I'm only moments away from death. Could still hear the breathing right in front of me, 4 feet away. There's nothing there. Absolutely nothing. What? Every cell in my body was saying to run the hell away, but I was afraid if I moved, I would be attacked. In that moment, I suddenly heard my mom calling my name way off in the distance. Finally grow some balls and start the quad, and take off at full speed, throwing my pellet gun on the ground. Remember the gun landing barrel first, and thinking my dad was going to be pissed if he found out, because he told me to never get dirt in the barrel. Screw it, I'm about to die anyways. Absolutely fly top speed back to the house, and asked my mom what she wanted. She hadn't called my name. Absolutely mind-fucked. Took weeks before I went out again. For years I never told anyone about this. I'm sort of autistic, so I just never really understood what it was that happened. Not until years later, when a friend was talking to me about hauntings, did I suddenly remember all the odd stuff I experienced as a kid, and it finally clicked that maybe it was a poltergeist or something. When I think about it now, it freaks me out even more than it did then. Thoughts?